Hi, my name is Chandra. Welcome to my channel. In my last video, I made beef stock, and while I was making that beef stock, I ladled some of it off and used it to make beef bourguignon. So that is what we're having for our first dinner of this. This was in January, this January week. So I'm just pulling some of that stock off and putting it through a sieve so I can measure out 2 cups. And then what I love about this recipe, and I'll link it below. I found it online and from a website I really like for a lot of things. I believe it was Serious Eats. This adds gelatin to the stock, which is also already quite a gelatinized stock. But with this extra gelatin, it becomes so thick and has this beautiful feel. So I'm doing that first and letting it sit while I get going on the stew part. So I have these beef shanks, and this is a cut that we've in the past had a hard time knowing what to do with, but it is really great in this meal. I do add about an hour on to what the recipe says to cook this for, because there's a lot of connective tissue in these leg pieces. They're really tough, so they need a little extra time, but it's totally worth it because they are so good. So first, I just had a little bit of bacon fat in that pan, and I'm going to sear these shanks. I will show you in a little while. There's like a skin that goes around, it's not really skin, but there's like a film that goes around the outside of these, and if you don't slice into that a couple places, then it'll tighten up, it's like kind of seize up, and the meat like folds and you can't get a nice flat sear. So I just made a couple cuts on the outside and I'll show you that here. Now I have some large cut carrots and onion and whole cloves of garlic. I'm just going to brown these a little bit, and these will cook with the meat for I think it's about 3 hours. There's a little bit of cognac. We'll boil that away. And then these vegetables can be removed, so you don't have to eat the really soft veggies, but they do lend a lot of flavor. And then we'll add in veggies that we will eat when there's about an hour left of the cooking time. Another thing I really like about this recipe is that it suggests cutting the meat into really big pieces, like 2-inch chunks. And that allows it to cook for a long time without getting dried out. And I know you're cooking in liquid, but still it keeps them a lot more tender when they're in big pieces like this. So I really like that. And you could put those marrow bones, that's what in the center there is marrow, right back into the pot to cook, because that marrow is delicious and that would fall out and be a part of the stew. It's nutritious, it's really good, but I like it so much that I actually save those bones out and finish roasting them in the oven until you can just pierce through the marrow easily with a knife, and the knife comes out hot, and then spread that on toast, and it is with some Maldon, like a big flake salt on top, and it is so good. So I'm adding some parsley and some bay leaves, and then I used a whole bottle of red wine, and then I'm going to get this beef chopped up. I was always so hesitant to make this because of the red wine part, and I don't really like red wine to drink, but oh, it is totally different when you cook with it. It is incredible. It is so good. We all have never been crazy about beef stews, but the flavor in this is so good. We've had it like once a month for quite a few months now, and we haven't gotten tired of it. To that mixture, you also saw me add in the stock that had the gelatin dissolved in it, as well as a little bit of fish sauce, a little bit of soy sauce, although I use coconut aminos. And now I'm going to sprinkle cassava flour all over these big chunks of meat. This would be really easy to do in a bowl, as the recipe suggests, but I thought, oh, I don't want to get something else dirty. But it was kind of tricky to get these all coated without having it all end up on the floor. So that's what I'm doing here, just rolling them around, and I'll throw all this cassava flour on the cutting board into the pot as well, and it's fine. It doesn't, sometimes you worry about flour clumping up, but this cooks for a very long time, and there's no clumps, and it's a nice thickener for this stew, along with the extra gelatin. So this is going to come back to a boil. I will partially cover it with a lid and put it into a 325 degree oven for about 3 hours. I guess I neglected to show you this part, but while that was cooking, I chopped up some bacon and I cooked that in a pan so it's nice and crispy. Got the bacon out of the pan and I removed, my bacon releases a lot of fat, so I removed some of that fat, but then used that fat to cook my carrots, and I used shallots. So carrots and shallots, just to nicely brown those. And after the stew had cooked for 3 hours, I pulled out those big chunks of carrot and onion and my herb, my bay leaves, and then added in the browned carrots and shallots and bacon pieces, and then cooked it for another hour, just until those veggies are tender and the stew is really thick. And that last hour, I did cook it uncovered in the oven. So we are going to serve this over a rice egg noodle and with some bread on the side. So here we have another like winter comfort meal. We're going to make chicken pie. I have been informed by my husband that chicken pie has a top crust and a bottom crust, whereas chicken pot pie has just a top crust. So we make it with a bottom crust, so it is chicken pie. So I started with some bacon fat in the bottom of my pan and onions and celery, and really this is like making chicken soup and then just making it thicker. These are carrots, they're purple carrots, which I regret buying, and then some yellow ones too. I thought that'd be fun for the kids, that maybe they would want to eat carrots even more, but they like orange carrots just fine. And the purple carrots gave the whole thing kind of a brown, darker tinge, which is fine, but sometimes appearances are important. So I won't buy purple carrots anymore. So I wanted to put some more bacon fat in there because I want to have enough fat to make a good roux. And you really need about equal parts fat and flour. I'm using cassava flour because some of us don't eat gluten in our house. You can use regular flour. That's like an equal substitution. So I'm stirring around that fat and flour, and now I'm adding some thyme and some rosemary, just all the chicken soup kind of flavors. But we'll turn this into chicken pie. I have a quart of chicken broth that I'm just going to add very slowly. Sometimes it's advisable to heat your broth up, which causes less clumping of the flour, but also if you just go slow, it works just fine, and it's one less pot that's made dirty. So I'm going to get this heated back up to boiling, and I do actually end up adding some more flour to this. It's already kind of thick, and here's some leftover. We had made a chicken, so this is leftover gravy, and that will go very nicely in there. And some more salt. So I do end up adding some more cassava flour. I felt like it wasn't thick enough, and since it was kind of thickened up, I could just sprinkle that on the top. Usually that can be a problem as far as flour clumps, but it worked out just fine. And there are my pieces of chicken going in, and some green beans. And then it looks like I could add more, so, oh, there's my cassava flour. I was looking to make this chock full of everything, so I ended up adding some peas as well. Now I'm moving on to my pie crust, and this is a gluten-free pie crust from the Loopy Whisk, which her recipes are amazing. They always, so far, have worked out really well for me. So I'll link that below. And this is lard, because we also have people who don't eat dairy in this house. So I'm using leaf lard, which doesn't, oh no, you know what? I didn't. I used regular lard, because this is a savory meal, so I didn't feel like it needed to be void of pork flavor since there's already bacon fat involved in this, and it was quite good. So the important thing, her recipe does not call for lard. She uses a butter block substitute, and the difference between butter and a straight fat like lard is that butter is only 80% fat and 15% milk solids or liquid in the case of a substitute. So you need to use, when you're using lard, you use only 80% of the amount of the butter, or you'll end up with an oily mess. So that is very important, and that has changed my baking completely to realize that I've had a much easier time using lard instead of butter because it really is just not a straight substitute. So I have my ice water over here, and I made those little crumbles of lard quite small because gluten-free flour does not absorb fat in the same way, so it needs to be pretty small in order to work. So now I'm getting my water in there, and this part is just like making regular pie dough where you just need to use enough water to have it hold together. Here I have my top and bottom crust, and I'm going to wrap these in plastic and let them rest in the refrigerator until I'm ready to roll out my dough. They should rest for at least 30 minutes, but I think it was several hours before I got to the part where I was ready to roll out my pie crust and par bake the bottom. I really like to make my chicken pie filling and crust and everything earlier in the day because I don't want the hot filling to go into my crust and then into the oven because it just kind of melts everything. So if it all is cold when it goes in, I just find it works out better. So here I'm ready to par bake my bottom crust, and that will keep the bottom from being soggy. So we'll get that nice and crispy and then fill it and top it with an unbaked crust and bake it more until that top is browned and the filling is bubbly. So rolling out a gluten-free pie crust is not easier than rolling out a regular pie crust, and pie crust for me is hard even in the best of gluten circumstances. So this one actually goes pretty well for me. The top does not, and that's more typical of me and pie. I do not do well with pie, but I just keep making it, but not enough to get better at it. Not a bad transfer. Now I just need to kind of patch this and move things around, and it's actually easier to do this part with a gluten-free crust because there's no gluten pulling back at you. So I'm just going to get all this kind of filled in, and then I will put some parchment paper in here, and I use some beans for my pie weights, which works great. I've been using the same beans for years. And I learned at one point, and this really helped me with my pie crust, that you need a lot of pie weights, like a mound, and then you need to push them up against the sides of the pan so that the crust along the sides doesn't slump down. And that made such a difference for me. So beans are really cheap. They're a lot cheaper to buy than pie weights. So I just got a bunch of those, and I keep using them, and I filled that crust right up. Before I fill it up, I will dock it with a fork here so that the crust does not puff, because partway through I'll take that parchment paper with the pie weights out and then finish browning the crust in the oven. My pie crust is done and cool. My filling is cool. It's been in the refrigerator. So now this takes quite a while to bake, 45 minutes to an hour. So I'm going to get this filled in. I'll bake it at 350. And I'm going to really put in as much as I can, and I will have some to save. And I ended up eating this, I added some more broth to it and ate it like soup myself the next day for lunch. And now here's my unsuccessful top crust, but I made it work and it was fine. This is what you would call a rustic crust. It's nice and texturized. So I am going to make a little egg wash, which will just be a beaten egg with like a tablespoon of a splash of water added. So I'll beat that up and get it spread over the top to make a nice shiny crust. Chicken pie is definitely better if you can let it sit for a good even half hour before you cut into it. We hardly ever get it cooked in time to really do that, so it does not slice as cleanly, but you can have that the next day. So I did not get the pie when it first came out, but I did get it when it was mostly eaten, so I'll make sure to show you a picture of that. This is a dinner that we forgot about for quite a while. So it's been years actually since we had these. These are turkey burgers with onions and cilantro, coriander, cumin, salt, pepper, of course. It calls for jalapeno. I leave that out, actually the pepper out too, in the hopes that my daughter, who's very sensitive to spice, will eat these. That's a little bit of garlic scape going in. Here's my cumin and my coriander. I'm going to grind and then also get that in. I use a lot of cilantro, more than the recipe calls for, because we really like that part. So I am making these actually a few days before we were planning to eat them, because I had cilantro that needed to be used up and I didn't want it to go bad before it came time to actually have these for dinner. That was a little bit of chili powder. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was a little bit of paprika that I put in at the end there. So I am getting these all mixed up. This is actually going to be more than we need for one dinner. So I'll freeze all of it, and then on the night we're going to have it, I'll just take out what we need and we can cook them right from frozen in the pan. Sometimes we like to grill these outside, but it has been freezing and so windy where we are. So we did these inside. I will make these into my burger patties, freeze them on a tray like this, and then once they're frozen, I can put them into a Ziploc bag. This was a little bit over a pound, so I am making 5 burgers out of it, and they're good size burgers, and I always put a little indent into the middle of my burger patties so they stay flat when they're cooking. Believe it or not, this freezer is totally organized. It's certainly faster to cook these if they are thawed first, but I do not thaw them first most of the time. And when I am cooking it right from frozen, I usually put the lid on for the first side to help them thaw out top and bottom. And then once I flip them over, in order to keep that top more on the crisp side from the searing, I leave the lid off. And by then they're usually thawed through. So I'm getting some buns into the toaster oven and getting these turkey burgers up to at least 165. We made such a major mistake when we ate these because it had been such a long time since we had them. We kind of forgot what toppings we like. And we did remember the sweet pickles and we did remember the spicy mayonnaise, but we totally forgot the avocado. And we had one and we even talked about it earlier and decided, yes, we would have that avocado. And then we forgot to use it until we were mostly done eating, which was such a bummer, but we'll have these again soon. They are back in the rotation, and next time, definitely avocado will go on. To go with these, I made a quick seaweed salad, and I didn't film it because I didn't realize how good it would be, but I'll have to show you that another time. This is a super easy and delicious dinner that my sister-in-law told me about that I am going to go about making more complicated this time because I'm going to make my own Italian breadcrumbs instead of buying them. Partly because it was a little bit of a last minute choice to have this, and partly because I wanted to make gluten-free. And maybe those are, findable, but maybe not in a store near me. So I am taking some of my homemade gluten-free bread, and I'm going to whiz that up in the food processor. And then I'm going to get it into the oven to dry. And once that's nice and dry, I didn't have Italian seasoning. So I'm also going to have to mix that up, but I made extra of the Italian seasoning, I made extra of the breadcrumbs, so the next time I have this dinner, it is going to be super quick and easy. As per my sister-in-law's instructions, I am rinsing these, patting them dry, and then I spread a little olive oil. Here's my breadcrumbs looking nice and dry. I'll get back to what I'm doing with the fish, but here I had parsley for the Italian seasoning, but it was frozen. So I'm just going to throw this on this tray with the breadcrumbs to dry, so it can be dry like the other spices, and when I add it to my breadcrumbs to make Italian breadcrumbs, everything will be dry. So just while I'm using the oven, I will put those in there. So here's some garlic powder. This is the Italian seasoning mix. I'll use garlic powder, I'll use onion powder, I'll use oregano, and in that tall jar I have some basil from last year's garden. So I'll crumble that in, and then I will add that parsley once it comes out of the oven. I felt like I'd be able to get those breadcrumbs even smaller once they were dried, and I thought this would be a good way to mix the seasoning in really well and incorporate those together. So I ran it through here for quite a while to get it nice and fine. I think I could have even gone finer next time. So back to my fish. I'm going to spread a little olive oil in the bottom of this pan so the fish does not stick. And then I'll also put a little olive oil on top of the fish. These are very small, thin fillets, so I'm packing them in pretty tight to be sure that they don't overcook. And then I only baked this for 8 minutes because they were so small and they were perfect. So now I can take my breadcrumb mixture and spread it all over the top. I used plenty. The flavor of these was so good. I'm glad I made extra, and maybe I can find other ways to use breadcrumbs. I haven't used a whole lot of breadcrumbs in my life. It's just not something I think about, but I might like to. And then I'm using ghee instead of butter on the top just because a couple of us have problems with dairy, but ghee does not have, it's pure fat, so no protein, no lactose, which are the usual problems with dairy. We're gonna have some peas on the side, and that will be dinner.